The auction hall erupted in laughter the moment the single dad raised his paddle. 8 outdated mining machines sat on the warehouse floor, dust-covered, rejected, and written off by every expert in the room. Investors mocked the equipment. Analysts called it scrap metal. Even the billionaire mining CEO at the front table smirked when the final bid landed. "Congratulations," he said. "You just bought 8 expensive mistakes." The crowd applauded the joke. But the single dad didn't argue. He simply signed the paperwork, loaded the machines, and left. What nobody knew was that a forgotten document hidden inside the auction records had caught his attention seconds before bidding. A detail so small that hundreds of professionals had overlooked it. Weeks later, strange trucks began arriving at his property. Months later, private investors started calling. And then one morning, a shocking offer worth $52 million landed on his kitchen table. The question was, what had everyone missed? The laughter followed him all the way to the loading yard. Workers leaned against forklifts, shaking their heads as the 8 aging mining machines were rolled onto flatbed trailers. Some looked rusted beyond repair. Others had missing panels and faded warning labels barely visible beneath years of dust. To everyone watching, the purchase made no sense. The single dad signed the final transport papers and slipped them into a worn folder. He could still hear the billionaire CEO's words echoing in his mind. 8 expensive mistakes. The crowd had loved that line. For a moment, doubt crept in. He had spent nearly everything he had saved. Money that was supposed to provide security for his family now sat in the form of 8 giant machines nobody wanted. His phone buzzed. It was his daughter. "Did you buy them?" He looked at the machines lined up behind him. "Yeah," he answered quietly. There was a pause. "Do you think it'll work?" He stared toward the auction warehouse. "I don't know yet." That answer was honest. Because he hadn't bought the machines for what they were. He had bought them because of something strange he had noticed seconds before the bidding started. Inside the auction documents was a maintenance record attached to machine number 4. Most people would have ignored it. But one line didn't make sense. The machine had supposedly operated in a mining zone that wasn't listed anywhere else in the records. Just a short code. 5 letters. No explanation. No location. No reference. Yet somehow the machine had logged hundreds of operating hours there. The inconsistency bothered him enough to place the first bid, then the second, and eventually all 8. Hours later, the convoy arrived at a small storage property outside town. As workers unloaded the machines, he climbed onto machine number 4 and began examining every inch of it. Rust covered most of the exterior. Nothing unusual. Then his flashlight passed over a small metal plate partially hidden beneath layers of dirt. He froze. The serial number stamped into the plate was different from the serial number listed in the auction records. And that was impossible. He climbed down from the machine and checked the auction documents again. The numbers didn't match. Not by a single digit. Not by a manufacturing batch. Not even by the year code. It was an entirely different serial number. For several seconds, he simply stared at the plate, wondering if someone had replaced a component years ago. That would have been the simplest explanation. But the plate wasn't attached to a removable part. It was welded directly onto the machine's main frame. That meant the machine itself was different. Someone, somewhere, had altered the records. The next morning, he began making calls. Most went nowhere. Former employees couldn't remember details. Old contractors had retired. Several companies involved with the mining operation no longer existed. Meanwhile, life kept moving. Mortgage payments were due. Utility bills arrived. His savings account continued shrinking. Every time he opened his banking app, his stomach tightened. At dinner, his daughter noticed his silence. "Are you worried?" He forced a smile. "Just working on something." She nodded, but he could tell she wasn't convinced. Later that night, after she went to bed, he spread dozens of documents across the kitchen table. Maintenance logs, transport manifests, equipment inspections, ownership transfers. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. Then another inconsistency appeared. The mismatched machine had been transferred between companies 4 separate times within 18 months. That wasn't normal. Mining equipment was expensive to move and difficult to relocate. Companies didn't shuffle machines around without a reason. He followed the paper trail deeper. Each transfer eventually pointed back to the same mining region, a region that appeared repeatedly in old records but seemed strangely absent from public reports. It was as if someone had erased part of the history. The discovery kept him awake most of the night. The following week, pressure increased. Friends told him to cut his losses. Neighbors joked about his mountain of junk. Even people trying to help suggested selling the machines before their value dropped further. Then came the biggest shock. While reviewing an archived transportation document, he found the name of a mining site connected to the mystery machine. He immediately searched for it. Nothing appeared. No maps. No company reports. No public references. Almost as if it had never existed. But buried inside a decades-old industry newsletter, he finally found a brief mention. Only 2 sentences. The site had been closed unexpectedly shortly before a major geological survey was scheduled to be completed. No explanation was provided. No survey results were ever published. His pulse quickened. A mining company doesn't spend millions on a geological survey unless they expect something important. And if those results had vanished, what exactly had been discovered there? As he printed the article, an unknown number appeared on his phone. When he answered, an elderly voice said something that made him sit upright instantly. "I heard you're asking questions about those machines," the man said. "I think I know where they really came from." The single dad tightened his grip on the phone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the elderly man continued. "I worked on those machines years ago." His heart began to race. "Who are you?" he asked. "My name is Walter Hayes. I was a field engineer before the site was shut down." The name meant nothing to him, but the confidence in the man's voice did. Walter agreed to meet the next day at a small diner on the edge of town. When the single dad arrived, he found an older man sitting alone in a booth with a weathered briefcase resting beside him. Walter looked at him carefully. "So you're the guy who bought all 8 machines?" The single dad nodded. Walter laughed softly. "People are calling you crazy. I've heard. Maybe they said the same thing about me." That got his attention. For the next hour, Walter shared pieces of a story few people seemed to know. Years earlier, he had worked at a remote mining project far from major operations. The company believed the area held little value, but several engineers had disagreed. According to Walter, unusual readings had started appearing during exploratory work. Nothing confirmed, nothing official, just enough to make some people curious. Then everything changed. Funding disappeared. The project was closed. Equipment was relocated. Records were archived. And employees were instructed to move on. Did they ever finish the geological survey? The single dad asked. Walter slowly shook his head. Not officially. The answer sent a chill through him. Walter opened his briefcase and removed a faded folder. Inside were old photographs, maintenance notes, and a folded map yellowed with age. Several locations on the map had been circled in red ink. "What are these?" the single dad asked. Walter's expression grew serious. "Places the survey team wanted to test next." The single dad stared at the circles. There were 6 of them, all clustered around the same forgotten area. Then Walter pointed to one particular location. "I always wondered why this spot scared management so much." The single dad looked closer. Next to the red circle was a handwritten note. 3 words. "Do not drill here." The words didn't look official. They weren't typed or stamped like the rest of the documents. They had been written by hand in dark ink that had slightly faded over time. "Who wrote this?" the single dad asked. Walter leaned back in his chair. "I don't know. The note wasn't there when the map was first created." "Then where did it come from?" "That's the question." The diner suddenly felt quieter. The single dad studied the map again. Of the 6 red circles, only one carried the warning. Every other location had simple survey markings and reference numbers. Only the spot stood out. Only this spot had been singled out. Walter slid a photograph across the table. It showed a group of engineers standing beside a drilling rig. Most were smiling. But in the background, partially hidden behind a truck, was the same location code that appeared in the maintenance records of machine number 4. The code that had started everything. What happened after this photo was taken? The single dad asked. Walter's face tightened. 3 weeks later, the project was shut down. Just like that. Just like that. The timing felt too convenient. A promising location. An unfinished survey. Missing records. Equipment moved away. Then a sudden closure. None of it fit together. When the meeting ended, Walter handed him the folder. I kept these for years because something never felt right. The single dad thanked him and drove home. That night, he spread the map across his kitchen table and began comparing it with publicly available geological data. Hours passed. Most of the information was complicated, but one thing became clear. The forgotten site sat near an area that had recently attracted interest from several mineral exploration companies. That alone didn't prove anything, but it was enough to keep him digging. A few days later, he contacted an independent geological consultant named Rachel. Unlike others, she agreed to review the materials before dismissing them. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. She examined the maintenance logs, the photographs, the transfer records, and finally the map. As she studied the red circles, her expression gradually changed. What is it? He asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled up several geological overlays on her computer and compared them to the marked locations. Her eyes widened. Then she slowly turned the screen toward him. Every red circle lined up with a formation known for containing highly valuable mineral deposits. The single dad felt his pulse quicken. So what does that mean? Rachel looked back at the map. It means whoever marked these locations knew exactly where to look. Then she pointed at the circle with the warning note. And what she said next changed everything. That's not the most interesting spot. She tapped a location nearby. This one is. The single dad leaned forward. Why that one? Rachel zoomed in on the geological overlays and layered several decades of survey data onto the screen. At first, he couldn't see what she was seeing. To him, it looked like a collection of lines, colors, and technical markings. But Rachel pointed to a narrow section running beneath the forgotten site. This formation shouldn't be here, she said. What do you mean? It was never included in the public reports. She clicked through additional records. The same anomaly appeared again, and again, and again. Someone had documented it internally, but somehow it never made it into the final published data. The room grew silent. If the estimates are even partially correct, Rachel said carefully, this area could be worth far more than anyone realized. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Months of uncertainty suddenly felt different. Not proven, not guaranteed, but different. Then Rachel asked a question that caught him off guard. Who else knows you're investigating this? Almost nobody. She nodded slowly. Keep it that way for now. Unfortunately, it was already too late. News travels quickly in industries built on valuable information. Within days, unusual things began happening. A stranger appeared at his storage property asking questions about the mining machines. An investment firm emailed him requesting a meeting. 2 separate buyers offered to purchase machine number 4 specifically. Not all 8 machines. Just that one. That detail bothered him. Then came the biggest surprise. A business article appeared online announcing that a billionaire mining CEO had begun quietly acquiring land around the same forgotten region. The very CEO who had laughed at him during the auction. The very man who had called the machines expensive mistakes. The single dad stared at the article for several minutes. Either it was a coincidence, or the billionaire had discovered something. Later that evening, as he locked the gate to the storage yard, a black luxury SUV pulled into the driveway. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, holding a sealed envelope. Mr. Carter? He asked. Yes. The man handed him the envelope. It's a private offer. The single dad opened it. His eyes widened instantly. Someone was offering 10 times what he had paid for all 8 machines. The number on the page didn't seem real. He read it once, then again, then a third time. 10 times his original investment. Most people would have accepted immediately. In fact, a few months earlier, he probably would have accepted without hesitation. The money would erase his financial worries overnight. The mortgage would be secure. His daughter's future would be protected. Every stressful night spent staring at unpaid bills would disappear. Yet something felt wrong. If the machines were truly worthless, nobody would be offering this kind of money. Especially not in cash. Especially not this quickly. He looked up at the man in the suit. "Who sent you?" "I'm not authorized to discuss that." "Then tell them no." The man's expression remained calm, but there was a hint of surprise in his eyes. "You may want to reconsider." "I already have." The man nodded once, returned to the SUV, and drove away. As the taillights disappeared into the darkness, the single dad felt equal parts nervous and confident. For the first time, he knew he wasn't chasing a fantasy. Someone wanted these machines badly. The next morning, he focused on machine number 4. Rachel's discoveries kept bothering him. There had to be a reason multiple buyers were targeting that specific machine. He spent hours examining every compartment, panel, and maintenance access point. Most contained exactly what he expected: aging components, worn wiring, and years of accumulated dust. Then he noticed a sealed metal housing tucked behind an inspection plate. The compartment wasn't listed in the maintenance diagrams. That alone was unusual. After carefully removing the cover, he discovered an old industrial data storage unit. His heart began pounding. The device had likely been sitting untouched for years, maybe decades. He immediately contacted a specialist capable of recovering obsolete digital records. The process took several days. They were some of the longest days of his life. Then the phone call finally came. The specialist sounded stunned. "You need to see this yourself." An hour later, the single dad sat in front of a computer screen as thousands of archived files appeared. Operational logs, equipment routes, field reports, survey coordinates. Most important of all, GPS tracking data from the machine's final years in operation. Machine number 4 had been working in areas never mentioned in official records. Areas located near the red circles on Walter's map. The forgotten locations weren't rumors. The machine had actually been there. And it hadn't visited just once. It had returned repeatedly over several months. As the specialist opened one of the final archive folders, a file appeared with a date only weeks before the project was shut down. The folder name contained just 2 words: high priority, and inside was a document marked confidential executive review only. The room fell silent. The single dad stared at the screen while the specialist carefully opened the confidential document. Both expected pages of technical information. Instead, the first page contained a summary prepared for senior executives. Several sections had been encrypted or corrupted over time, but enough remained readable to reveal something important. The document referenced preliminary survey results from the forgotten site, results that were never included in public records, results that management had reviewed personally. The single dad leaned closer. "Can you recover the missing sections?" The specialist nodded slowly. "Maybe. It'll take time." Time was exactly what he felt he didn't have. Interest in the machines was growing. Strangers were asking questions. Buyers kept calling. And somewhere out there, powerful people seemed determined to obtain information connected to the site. Over the next week, the specialist recovered additional fragments. The numbers weren't complete, but they painted a remarkable picture. The underground formation was far larger than the original exploration team had expected, potentially several times larger. Large enough to change the value of the entire region. Rachel reviewed the recovered data and immediately understood its significance. "We need independent verification," she said. "How much will that cost?" Her answer nearly made him choke. The survey would require specialized equipment, permits, and professional analysis. The total cost was far beyond what he could afford. For the first time in months, the momentum stopped. The evidence was promising, but without verification, it remained only a theory. That night, he sat alone at the kitchen table, studying the numbers. His daughter walked in and noticed the frustration on his face. "You look like you're losing." He smiled weakly. "Maybe I am." She looked at the stack of documents. "Then why haven't you quit?" The question caught him off guard. After a moment, he answered honestly. because every time I get close to giving up, I find another reason to keep going. The next morning, his phone rang. It was Rachel. Her voice sounded excited. I showed a small part of the data to someone I trust. Ooh, a private investor. There was a brief pause. He wants to meet you, and he wasn't the only one. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room overlooking the city. The single dad arrived carrying nothing more than a worn folder filled with documents, maps, and recovered data. Across the table sat 3 investors and a legal advisor. Unlike the people at the auction, they weren't laughing. They were listening. For nearly 2 hours, he explained everything. The mismatched serial numbers, the missing records, Walter's map, the recover machine data, the confidential reports. Rachel occasionally stepped in to explain the technical details. When the presentation ended, the room became silent. The investors exchanged glances. One of them finally leaned forward. "What you're suggesting is extraordinary." "I know. Do you believe it?" The single dad looked down at the documents that had consumed months of his life. Yes. The investors requested several days to conduct their own review. Those days felt endless. Then the call finally came. They were in, not with a massive investment, not yet, but enough funding to launch an independent verification survey. For the first time, the theory would face a real test. Weeks later, specialized crews arrived at the forgotten site. Drilling equipment rolled across terrain that had been largely ignored for years. Every day felt like a gamble. Every sample mattered. Every report created new anxiety. Then the first verified results arrived. Rachel called immediately. Her voice was shaking. "You need to come here." The single dad drove to the survey office faster than he ever had. When he arrived, a crowd of analysts stood around a large monitor. No one was smiling. No one was speaking. They were staring. Rachel pointed to the screen. The data confirmed the underground formation existed. Not only that, it extended far beyond the original estimates. Several analysts had independently checked the calculations, then checked them again. The results stayed the same. The forgotten region contained one of the most significant mineral discoveries seen in decades. The room erupted into excited conversation. For a moment, the single dad couldn't move. Months earlier, people had mocked him for buying 8 abandoned machines. Now, those same machines had helped uncover something extraordinary. But the celebration didn't last long. Later that evening, news of the survey began spreading through industry circles. Calls started flooding in. Exploration companies, investment firms, corporate representatives. Everyone wanted information. Everyone wanted access. Then Rachel received a message that instantly wiped the excitement from her face. "What is it?" he asked. She slowly handed him her phone. The message came from the billionaire CEO's company. They had just secured control of nearly every piece of land surrounding the discovery zone, and they were moving faster than anyone expected. The news hit like a punch to the stomach. The single dad read the message twice, hoping he had misunderstood it. He hadn't. The billionaire's company had spent months quietly buying properties, mineral rights, and access routes around the region. While everyone else was focused on proving the discovery existed, they had been positioning themselves to control what happened next. They were preparing for this, Rachel said. "Before the survey results?" She nodded. "Looks that way." The realization was unsettling. Somehow, the billionaire had learned enough to recognize the area's potential, even if he didn't have the complete picture. Now he was moving aggressively. Over the following weeks, lawyers, consultants, and corporate representatives entered the story. Questions about ownership surfaced. Questions about access rights. Questions about the recover machine data and the historical records. Several companies attempted to challenge the findings. Others tried to negotiate private deals. A few even suggested that the single dad should sell immediately before legal complications grew worse. But every challenge led back to the same conclusion. The documentation was legitimate. The machine records were authentic. The survey results were independently verified. And most importantly, the single dad controlled the information that had unlocked the discovery. For the first time, major corporations were forced to come to him. The man who had once been laughed out of an auction hall now sat across from executives worth billions. Offers began arriving daily. Some were impressive. Others were astonishing. Yet he refused to rush. He had spent too many months uncovering the truth to make a desperate decision. Then one afternoon, a black envelope arrived by private courier. No company logo, no return address, just his name. Inside was a short letter requesting a confidential meeting. At the bottom was a signature he recognized immediately. The billionaire CEO, the same man who had publicly mocked him, the same man who called the machines expensive mistakes. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning, and according to the letter, the billionaire intended to discuss a proposal unlike any offer made so far. The final sentence made his pulse quicken. Come prepared to change your life forever. The meeting took place on the top floor of a glass tower overlooking the city skyline. When a single dad stepped out of the elevator, he immediately recognized the billionaire waiting near the conference room windows. Months earlier, the man had stood in an auction hall, smiling as the crowd laughed. Now there was no smile, only focus. The billionaire extended his hand. Thank you for coming. The single dad shook it. Neither mentioned the auction. Neither needed to. They both remembered. After a brief exchange, the billionaire slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were financial statements, legal agreements, development plans, and valuation reports prepared by some of the industry's most respected experts. The numbers seemed unreal. The billionaire's company wanted full access to the discovery, the historical data, and the rights connected to the machines. In return, they were offering $52 million. The single dad sat quietly. He had imagined this moment many times. Yet seeing the actual figure on paper felt different. His hands remained steady, but his heart was racing. $52 million. Enough to completely transform his family's future. Enough to erase every financial worry he had ever carried. The billionaire watched him carefully. You earned this, he said. The words were unexpected. So now you believe I wasn't crazy? A faint smile appeared. I stopped believing that a long time ago. The room fell silent. For the first time, there was no rivalry between them. Only mutual respect. The billionaire leaned back. When you bought those machines, every expert in the industry saw scrap. And you. I saw scrap too. The honesty made them both laugh. Then the billionaire's expression turned serious. You found something all of us missed. The single dad looked down at the agreement. Months of uncertainty. Months of pressure. Months of people telling him he was making a mistake. All of it had led here. He began reading the final pages carefully. Page after page looked straightforward. Then something caught his attention. A small clause buried deep within the contract. Most people would have skipped right past it. But after everything he had learned, he no longer ignored small details. The clause referenced additional exploration rights tied to surrounding zones that had not yet been fully evaluated. His eyes narrowed. The billionaire noticed immediately. What is it? The single dad didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to the maps included in the proposal. Because for the second time in his life, a tiny overlooked detail was raising a very big question. And this question might be worth even more than $52 million. The single dad spent the next several hours reviewing every page of the agreement. The deeper he looked, the more convinced he became that the overlooked clause wasn't there by accident. The surrounding zones had been labeled as low-priority areas. Yet the company's own internal maps devoted an unusual amount of attention to them. That contradiction bothered him. Finally, he closed the folder and looked across the table. You think there's more out there? The billionaire didn't answer immediately. That hesitation told him everything. A slow smile appeared on the single dad's face. Months earlier, he would have signed without asking a single question. Not anymore. He had learned that the most valuable information was often hidden in the smallest details. After several rounds of negotiation, the agreement was revised. The single dad retained a percentage of future discoveries connected to the surrounding exploration zones while still securing the life-changing deal. When the final documents were signed, the room erupted in handshakes and congratulations. But the most important moment came later. Much later. That evening, He returned home, carrying no briefcases and no entourage. Just himself. His daughter was waiting at the kitchen table. She looked up the moment he walked through the door. Did it happen? For a second, he couldn't speak. Then he nodded. Tears immediately filled her eyes. She ran across the room and wrapped her arms around him. All the stress, doubt, and uncertainty of the past months seemed to disappear in that single moment. The money mattered. The success mattered. But not as much as this. Weeks later, he returned to the same auction hall where people had laughed at him. The building looked exactly the same. The difference was the way people looked at him now. Not with amusement, not with pity, with respect. As he walked past the rows of equipment, he glanced at an old machine sitting in the corner. Others ignored it. He smiled, because he had learned something that day in the auction hall. Sometimes the greatest opportunities aren't hidden from everyone. They're hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone willing to look twice.